My stepdad demanded I pay $400 rent in my own house, but when I showed him my father's inheritance documents, I discovered my mother was hiding $130,000 in debt, and now they're begging for forgiveness. I'm 18 years old, just graduated from high school like 3 months ago, and honestly, I still can't believe everything that's happened in these last few months. Like, literally, my life did a complete 180, and I need to tell this story because sometimes I feel like if I don't get it out, I'm going to explode. The thing is, I always thought my family was, I don't know, normal, I guess. I mean, yeah, we had our problems like any family, but nothing prepared me for discovering that basically everything I believed about my life was a lie. I should start at the beginning, when I was 6 years old and my biological dad, Joseph, died in a car accident. I don't remember much about him, to be honest. I have like flashes of memory, like him playing with me in the yard or reading me bedtime stories, but they're blurry images, like old photos that fade over time. What I do remember perfectly is the funeral. Everyone dressed in black, my mom Elizabeth crying nonstop, and me not really understanding what was happening, because at that age, death is a super abstract concept. After my dad died, my mom was like 2 years alone raising me. She worked at an accounting office, and honestly, she really struggled to make ends meet. Or at least, that's what she always told me. When I was 8, she met Frank at, I don't know, I think it was at a church meeting or something like that, and they started dating. Frank seemed like a decent guy at first. He worked in construction, always drove his Ford truck full of tools, and he tried to be nice to me, even though I was obviously in that phase of, I don't want a stepdad because my dad was the best in the world, even though I didn't even remember him well. They got married when I was 9, and Frank moved into our house. Well, into the house where I had lived my whole life with my mom. For years, everything was relatively calm. I mean, Frank and I were never super close, but we didn't get along badly either. He had his things and I had mine. My mom worked and cooked and basically kept the house running like she always had. Things started getting weird right after my 18th birthday in May. I was planning to take a gap year before college because honestly, I had no idea what I wanted to study, and all my friends told me it's okay to take time to think. Plus, I had gotten a part-time job at an electronics store that paid decent for being my first real job. One night we were having dinner. I think it was a Tuesday, because my mom always made tacos on Tuesdays, and Frank suddenly drops the bomb just like that. He looks at me over his plate and says, "Connor, you're 18 now, and I think it's time you start contributing to the house. You're going to have to pay rent." I was left with the taco halfway to my mouth like, "Excuse me?" And he continues, "You're an adult now, and adults pay for where they live. I'm thinking about $400 a month. It's reasonable, considering it includes food and utilities." My mom didn't say anything, just kept eating. Like Frank had just commented about the weather, and I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of cold water on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about how I was going to pay $400 a month with my shitty salary from the electronics store. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got because, this is my house. I grew up here. My dad lived here. And now Frank comes to tell me I have to pay rent? The next day, I decided to do something I should have done years ago. I looked in the attic boxes for my dad's documents that my mom had kept after his death. There were 3 big boxes full of papers, photos, old receipts, and after 2 hours searching, I found what I needed, the deed to the house. And there it was, black and white. The house was in Joseph's name, my biological father, and according to the will I also found in the same folder. And when he died, the house automatically passed to my name with my mom as legal guardian until I turned 18. I literally sat there on the dusty attic floor with the papers in my hands, feeling like I had just discovered I had superpowers or something. That night, I waited until we were having dinner again. Frank was talking about, I don't know what remodeling project he was working on, and I simply said, "Hey Frank, about that rent thing you mentioned." He looked up and smiled like, "Oh yeah, well, I'm glad you're being mature about it, Connor. $400 isn't that much, really." And I took a deep breath and said, "The thing is, I'm not going to pay rent because this house is legally mine. I inherited it from my dad when I was 6. The silence that followed was so thick you could literally cut it with a knife. Frank was looking at me like I had told him I was an alien. My mom had gone pale and dropped her fork, which made a loud noise against the plate. Frank started laughing, but it wasn't a genuine laugh, but one of those nervous and uncomfortable laughs, and said, "Very funny, Connor, but seriously, we need to talk about your contribution to this house." I pulled out copies of the documents I had made that afternoon and put them on the table. "Here's the deed, and here's the will. You can review them if you want." Frank took the papers with trembling hands and read them, his face going from disbelief to shock and then to something that looked between fury and humiliation. My mom wasn't saying anything, just staring at her plate like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Then Frank threw the papers on the table and said, "This is ridiculous, Elizabeth. Did you know about this?" And my mom nodded very slowly without looking up. I was having a bit of fun with the situation. I'm not going to lie. After years of Frank acting like he was the absolute owner of the house, seeing him so thrown off felt like poetic justice. Then I decided to completely turn the situation around and said, "Since we're clarifying things, Frank, technically you and my mom are the ones who should be paying me rent for living in my house, don't you think?" The face Frank made was priceless. He turned red as a tomato and started stuttering something about disrespect and ungratefulness. But I just shrugged and said, "I'm just applying your same logic. Adults pay for where they live, right?" The next few weeks were super tense in the house. Frank barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with that sharp and cold tone. My mom tried to act like everything was normal, but you could tell she was super stressed. I saw her all the time with her brow furrowed and biting her nails, which is something she only does when she's very anxious. I, for my part, felt weird, like powerful for having put Frank in his place, but also confused because something didn't add up. If my mom knew the house was legally mine, why did she let Frank ask me for rent? Why had she never told me anything about the inheritance? One night at like 11 p.m., I got up to go to the bathroom and heard my mom talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low and urgent. I stayed in the hallway listening. I know it's wrong, but I needed to know what was going on. And I heard her say, "We can't keep hiding it. He already found out about the house, and if he keeps investigating, he's going to discover the rest. I don't know what we're going to do." My heart started beating super fast. The rest? What else was there that I didn't know? The next day, I decided to follow Frank when he left the house, saying he was going to see a client. I took my bike and followed him, keeping distance. He drove like 20 minutes until he got to a Starbucks downtown. I parked my bike and went in after him. I sat at a table in the back with a cap and my headphones on, pretending to be on my phone. Frank sat with a guy I didn't recognize, a man like 50 years old in a gray suit, and they started talking. I couldn't hear everything, but I did catch fragments. The guy in the suit passed some papers to Frank and told him something about options and terms and interest rates. Frank looked overwhelmed. He had his head in his hands and was constantly shaking it. After like 40 minutes, they got up. Frank took the papers and put them in his truck. I left quickly before he saw me. That night at dinner, I couldn't hold back anymore and said, "So, Frank, how did it go with your client today?" He looked up super fast and said, "Fine. Why do you ask?" And I said, "Just curious. I saw you at Starbucks with a guy in a suit. Didn't seem like the kind of construction client you normally have." Frank's face fell apart. My mom got up from the table so fast her chair almost fell over and said, "Connor, stop." But I was already angry, frustrated by all the lies and secrets, and I yelled, "Stop what? Stop asking questions about my house and about what you're hiding from me." "I heard your phone conversation, Mom. I know there's something else you're not telling me." My mom started crying, and Frank got up saying this was my fault for being a nosy brat, but then my mom yelled, "Enough, both of you." She sat back down, wiped her tears, and said with a trembling voice, "Okay, Connor, I'm going to tell you. The house has an $80,000 mortgage debt." I froze. I literally felt like the floor was opening up beneath me. $80,000? How was that possible? My dad had finished paying off the house before he died. That's what it said in the documents I found. My mom continued, explaining with a broken voice that after Joseph died, she had had serious financial problems. I was very small. She worked, but didn't earn enough. And eventually she had to take out a mortgage on the house to be able to pay the bills and support me. For years, she had been paying that mortgage in secret. Frank found out when they got married and since then had been helping with the payments, but lately with the economy and problems at his job, things had gotten very difficult. Frank finally spoke and admitted that the guy I saw him with was a financial advisor. He was looking at options to refinance the debt or take out a second mortgage, but with current interest rates, the options were terrible. I was in total shock, trying to process all this information. My house, my dad's house, the house that was supposed to be my debt-free inheritance, had a massive debt that could make us lose it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed awake doing calculations on my phone, researching mortgages and payment options, reading forums of people in similar situations. The next morning, I called the bank to ask for an appointment with a financial advisor. I needed to understand exactly what situation we were in and what real options we had. The appointment was 2 days later. I went alone because I wanted to have all the information before talking to my mom and Frank. The advisor, a guy named Patrick, like 40 years old, with glasses and a super professional attitude, reviewed all the information and explained to me that with the current payments my mom and Frank had been making, it would take between 10 to 15 years to completely pay off the debt, depending on whether they could increase the monthly payments. He showed me different payment plans, tables with numbers that made my head hurt, and basically all the options were depressing. That night, I called a family meeting. We sat in the living room and I explained to them what the advisor had told me. Frank looked defeated. My mom wouldn't stop crying, and I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, despite being barely 18 years old. But while I was driving back from the bank, I had had an idea. It was risky and meant a huge change for all of us, but maybe it was our best option. I told them, what if we rent out the house? The house has 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, it's in a decent area, we could easily get $2,000 or $2,500 a month for it. With that money, we could pay the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and still have something left over. We could rent a smaller and cheaper apartment, like $1,200 a month, and use the difference to pay off the debt faster. Frank looked at me like I was crazy and said, "You want us to leave our house?" And I responded, "It's my house, Frank. And yes, I want to leave it temporarily if that means saving it from foreclosure." My mom surprisingly supported the idea after thinking about it. I think she was so desperate to find a solution that anything sounded better than continuing as we were. Frank resisted at first, but eventually agreed when I showed him the numbers and made him see that it was that, or potentially lose the house completely in a few years. I spent the next 2 weeks like crazy preparing the house. I painted the walls that needed touching up, fixed things that were broken, cleaned the yard that was neglected, hired a professional photographer to take decent photos for the listing, basically became a kind of amateur real estate agent. I posted the house on all the sites I found: Zillow, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, local rental groups, literally anywhere I could get exposure. We had like 15 people interested in the first 2 weeks. Some were terrible, like college students who wanted to fit 8 people in the house and were obviously going to destroy it. Others just didn't qualify financially. But finally, I found Evan and Melissa, a young couple like 26 and 27 years old, newlyweds, both with good jobs, no kids yet but planning to have them soon, responsible and decent people who would treat the house well. They liked the house immediately, especially the backyard that had a huge tree where my dad had built a treehouse when I was a baby. We agreed on $2,300 a month with a 1-month security deposit. We signed the contract, and suddenly, we had a plan that could work. My mom, Frank, and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was significantly smaller than the house, obviously, and Frank complained constantly about having to share the bathroom with me instead of having his own, but the numbers worked. Between what I earned at the electronics store, my mom's salary, what Frank brought in from his construction jobs, and what was left of the rent money after paying the mortgage, we were surviving and actually paying a little extra each month to reduce the principal of the debt faster. For the first time in months, I felt like maybe things were going to be okay, that we were going to be able to save my dad's house after all. But then, like 3 months after moving, I got a call from the bank. It was Patrick, the financial advisor, and his voice sounded serious and formal. He told me we needed to meet urgently, that additional information about the property had appeared that wasn't in the initial records. I felt my blood freeze. What could it be now? I went to the bank the next day. Patrick had me come into his office and put several documents in front of me. Turns out there was a second lien on the house for an additional $50,000 that my mom had taken out like 5 years ago. Another $50,000 of debt that nobody had mentioned to me. which raised the total debt to $130,000. I left the bank on autopilot, drove back to the apartment feeling like I was going to throw up, went up the stairs and opened the door, finding my mom in the kitchen preparing dinner. She saw me come in and by my face she immediately knew something was wrong. I yelled at her, $50,000 more, Mom. $50,000 more that you never mentioned? How many more lies are there? How much more debt is there that I don't know about? She started crying, saying she was so sorry, that she had taken out that loan when Frank lost his job a few years ago, and they desperately needed money not to lose the house, then that she was afraid to tell me because she knew I was going to get angry, that everything had gotten out of control and she didn't know how to fix it. I was so angry, so betrayed, so exhausted from this whole situation. I told her I couldn't believe she had lied to me again, that I thought there would be no more secrets after the first $80,000. Frank arrived like an hour later and there was another huge fight. I yelled at him, how was it possible that he didn't tell me about this additional debt either? He claimed he assumed my mom had told me. It was a total disaster. That night I locked myself in my room and did calculations again. Now with $130,000 of total debt, the situation was significantly worse. But the rent from the house still covered the minimum payments on both debts plus a little extra. I made the decision that I wasn't going to give up. That house was the only thing I had left from my dad. It was my inheritance. It was my legacy. And I wasn't going to let my mom and Frank's bad financial decisions destroy it. It's been like 4 months since I discovered the second debt. Evan and Melissa are still in the house, and they're excellent tenants. They always pay on time and take care of the property like it's theirs. I got a second job on weekends at a restaurant to contribute. More money to pay off the debts faster. My mom finally showed me absolutely all the financial documents and swore there are no more hidden debts. I want to believe her, but honestly the trust is super damaged. Frank and I have reached a sort of uncomfortable truce. He apologized for asking me for rent at the beginning and acknowledged he had no right. I apologized for following him, although honestly I don't regret it because I needed to know what was going on. Last week I went to visit the house when Evan and Melissa weren't there. I have the legal right to inspect the property with prior notice, and I stayed for a while standing in the yard looking at the treehouse my dad built. It's old and worn now. The wood is rotting in some places, but it's still there, still standing after all these years. I climbed up into it for the first time since I was a kid, and from up there I could see the whole yard, the neighborhood. And I thought about my dad and how he never imagined that leaving the house would cause so much drama and so much stress. But I also thought that he would have wanted me to fight for it, not to give up, to do what was necessary to keep his legacy alive. So that's what I'm going to do. No matter how many jobs I have to get, no matter how many years it takes me, I'm going to pay off those damn debts and I'm going to get my house back free and clear. It's what my dad would have wanted, and I owe it to him and to myself.